For the Greeks as a people, Herodotus says that they were divided into three main tribes: Ionians, Dorians, and Iolans. The Iolans are Aioli or Aeolians, whose name the Greeks renamed. Josephus said that Elisha from Izorod is Aioli. The prophet Ezekiel calls Morea the land of Elisha. Elisha we call Eolim today. Edward Wells connects Elisha and Morea and says, Achaia and the Peloponnese are the land of Elisha. There is the city of Elis, the river of Elissos, and Eleusis town in Arcadia. Eusebius says, Arcos is the Pelasgian after whom Arcadia is named. For the Serbian title of Karan, Gordon Child says that it is a Cypriot-Arcadian word in Greek epic. Who were the Aioli after whom the Greeks got its name in the Bible? Greece. He answered this question Herodotus, who says, the Aeolians, as the Greeks say, were formerly called Pelasgians. Strabon writes the following about Aioli. As for the Pelasgians, it is almost universally accepted that it was an ancient people spread throughout Greece, and especially in the lands of Aeola, the neighbor of the Thessalians. As for the Peloponnese, to which the name Elisha is associated as a land, Strabon says that his old name was Appia, and that it is referred to as the land of Appian. The Herodotus notes that among the Scythians, the earth is called Appia, more precisely, the goddess who represents the earth. Here Herodotus was little confused, because among the old Serbs, Appia is called only a land surrounded by water, such as Morea, because Appia is not a land but water, and the original water from which the earth came into being. The arrival of Danae from Egypt to Appius and the bringing of the Greeks is usually taken as an appearance of the Greeks, the beginning of the story of them. The arrival of the foreign people in the land of Serbian Pelons was not accepted as final surrender of that land, because Pelop the Frisian arrived in Appius according to Eusebius in 1396 BC, and according to some authors around 1360 BC, and first he captured Elis, and then gradually conquered the whole land of Appius, which he called the Peloponnese. Strabon quotes Ephorus and says that he wrote that the Peloponnese was also called Pelasgia. Euripides wrote that Pelasgians took the name Danaians after Danae who came to them. Anticlid wrote that the Pelasgians inhabited the islands of Lemno and Imbro, and that a part of them went to Italy with Tirce and Attis. There were also Pelasgians in Athens, whom the Athenians called Pelargi. Herodotus is many clearer on this point when he says, the Athenian people were Pelasgians who had to learn a new language during the Greek conquest. He then continues, of the Pelasgian people, they began modestly and increased to now form a multitude of people thanks to the degradation of especially numerous Pelasgians and many other barbaric peoples. Compared to the Greeks, it does not seem to me that any Pelasgian people, few or barbarians, have ever been significantly increased. Strabon lists the tribes that inhabited Greece before the Greeks, and mentions Driopi, Cauconi, Pelasgi, Lelegi, and says that there were others. Driopi is a well-known Serbian tribe, Drevljani, which is mentioned in Asia and later in Russia. The Cauconi are the Tsautoni are the Tsatsoni in Peloponnese and in Troy, and Lelegi or Lelezi are famous warrior tribe that gave Kari. The Shakons were in Elis, in Peloponnese, and in their country one river was called Teutea, and so was the town of the same river. Tzakona still exists today under that name. Lelega was in Thessaly, Acarnania, Locrida, and Boeotia. As for the area of Greece and its borders, Ephor and I have left accurate data on that. Ephor and Strabon have left us accurate data about it. To the west, as far as Epirus, the extreme Greek tribe was the Acarnans, who were in the Gulf of Ambracia. Going from Acarnan to north, the extreme Greek tribes were the Aetolians, Locri Ozoli, and Thessalians. All the way to the river Peneia. The river Penei was the border between Thessaly and Macedonia, and at the same time the border between Greeks and Serbs. Penei flows from the south side of Mount Olympus and flows into the Gulf of Thessalonica. Contemporary to the historians in the West, that believed that Achaeans were the first to speak Greek. However, Strabon says that the Achaeans are Aioli, which means Pelasgians and not Greek. Alfred Morris says that the Aioli are recognized as Pelasgians. Whether the Achaeans, or perhaps only a part of them, spoke Greek is still an irresolvable question. As for the origin of Greeks, the ancient Greek writers invented a mythology about their origin from Deucalion and his descendants. Having stated all that, as the Greeks wrote it, Bohardius concludes that all that is too suspicious and unacceptable. And indeed, not only does this story not rely on historical facts, but it is in conflict with them. The Thracian Eumolp occupied Attica around 1400 BC. On that occasion, the Greeks are not mentioned on it, but only the Pelasgians, which means that they, as a people, did not yet have any significance. When Cadmo came to Boeotia, there were no Greeks there either. He fought against Thracians, but was expelled from Boeotia. He went to Illyria and founded the city of Budva, where he died. We learned from Herodotus that the Greeks were weak and small when they separated from Pelasgians, and whom they lived in community. That community cannot be understood otherwise than that they were subordinated to the Pelasgians. We learn from Homer that Hellenes are mentioned for the first time in one part of Thessaly. The Hellenists trace their origin of the Hellenic name to a small area near Dodona called Helopia. Allegedly, the Heli tribe lived in that area, which were the first Hellenes. This would mean that, after arriving from Egypt, the Greeks dispersed in smaller groups in several directions, so that a small part reached close to Dodona. But near Homer, Heli is called Seli, and in that area one river was called Selea. It is likely that the Greeks got their name from the name of that river, since the Greeks left out initial letter Sima in the names of Serbian origin. So from Seli they became Eli or Elini. From the area of Seli they moved to Thessaly, where Homer mentions them for the first time. The case of Dorians, more correctly Doriani, occupies a special chapter in Greek history. About that, by the way, John Fine says, Greek tradition connects the invasion of Dorians from the return of Heracles to the Peloponnese and invasion of Dorians. Greek tradition connects with the return of Heracles. Basic thesis in early shows of that case is that Eurystheus took out from Mycena sons of Heracles and his supporters, who after many travel and with help of Athenians are returning on Peloponnese and taking over their legal heritage. In this story, colored by patriotism and propaganda, the arrival of Dorians is explained not as an invasion of newcomers, but as a return to Peloponnese of legal rulers. It is interesting to note that in a legend the Dorians appropriated the Mycenaean hero Heracles. The legend is accepted as a fact. Thucydides says that this happened 80 years after Trojan War. It is usually assumed that Dorian invasion was in 1105 BC. Pyrrhus says that Dorians came from Illyria. The memory of Dorians remained in the name of Doiran Lake, whose old name is Dorian Lake. Diodorus says that the fourth king of Heraclius who ruled in order was called Buck, and that he ruled for 35 years. Since he was the most famous of all rulers, his successors were no longer called Heraclici but Bacchici, Bacchidas. When the Bacchici came to power, there were 200 of them, and they all took part in running the state as one body. The Dorians were a small warrior company that invaded Peloponnese and occupied it. Even after some time, there were only 200 of them who ruled in a Getic way as the ruling class. The sixth ruler from Bacchici was called Alexander. The Bacchici are named after god Bak, whom they worshipped as their supreme deity. The name Heraclici was used incorrectly because of Heracles, Serbon. In fact, it was the return of Serbs to power in Peloponnese. The beginning of Greek education is the period from 10th to the 7th century BC. The beginning of Greek history is the first Olympics in 776 BC. Fine says, later the Greeks broke into Homer's ethics, not doubting that the heroes of Trojan War under the leadership of Agamemnon of Mycena were not their ancestors, but modern science considered that possibility that Homer took the saga that the Greeks, coming at an unknown time, inherited from their predecessors.